Hi board gamers, and welcome back to Not Board Gaming. I'm your host, I'm Mark. Now today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the solo version of On Mars by Eagle Gryphon Games, designed by Vital Lacerda, with the artwork by Ian O'Toole. And look at this artwork, it is rather spectacular. Now off the bat I want to say that this is a copy provided to me by Eagle Gryphon Games. However, as you know my channel, I will provide an honest review of the solo experience in On Mars, so the fact that they provided a copy will not bias me in any way, shape or form. Now, I will say that this will be a concentrated look at the solo play of the game. Yes, I will discuss the game mechanics, etc., but I'm going to concentrate purely on the solo version of this game. If you want an in-depth look of how to play the game and more multiplayer, then check out Paul Grogan's Gaming Rules video. The link is above, and he can give you an in-depth version on how to play the game. I already did an unboxing video for this, and if you check out this link above, you will see the unboxing and the quality of the components that are inside, and it is absolutely stunning. One of the finest looking games I've seen. This was a Kickstarter last year, started shipping to backers earlier this year, so people have started receiving their copies, and it's generated quite a bit of buzz over on BGG and in the hotness there. So, without much further ado, let's take an in-depth look at the solo version of On Mars by Eagle Gryphon Games, designed by Vital Lacerda, with the artwork by Ian O'Toole. So as you can see, the very first thing that On Mars asks of you is that you have a very big table. This beautiful player board with your the main board and the side bits and the cards and the tiles, etc. probably measures, I don't know, about 3 foot by maybe 1.5 feet across. So it's a fairly sizable chunk of table space that you need from On Mars. But once you've set it out, you can see that there is a real beauty and a majesty in laying this game out. Now, the time-lapse video that you just saw me setting it out, everything took just over 10 minutes then, so there is a fairly lengthy setup time, and I've become quite adept in kind of the 10, 11 games I played of this at setting it up. Certainly the first time you play it as a solo player, you're going to set it up like a 2-player game, and then you're going to take some pieces off the AI's board that aren't relevant for it as well. But as you can see, it's got this wonderful, wonderful sprawling table presence with the great artwork by Ian O'Toole, these really, really high quality screen printed wooden meeples, be it peoples, be it buildings, be it robots, or be it your Mars rover, and even these little spaceships here. You have some hex tiles that you lay out the board, and we'll come on to those in a little while. And of course, each player gets their own little Matt Damon to run around the board on. So yeah, all looks great, and everything has a purpose in this game, and despite it looking absolutely fantastic, it's no good just looking great if it doesn't play great. So let's talk a little bit about the gameplay. So, On Mars takes place in the decades after the first settlers arrived on Mars in 2037. And what's happened is Mars has become commercialised, and there are a number of big corporations vying for the most surface area on Mars. And you are going to be playing somebody who works for one of those corporations. And there are 2 parts to the board. Over on this side of the board, on the left-hand side, is the orbit side, because in the early stages, your development is extremely dependent on the supply of materials and blueprints, etc., coming from Earth. However, on the other side of the board, when you travel to the surface itself, that's when you can expand out your colony. And the game will take place over a number of phases as you try to complete a number of missions that are given to you by your corporation, as well as a number of your own personal goals. Now, in the solo game, the aim is not only to get the most number of points, but there are also a number of different solo objectives for you to progress through, starting at stage 1 and moving up from there as well. And that's how it differs to the multiplayer game. Of course, in the multiplayer game, I should imagine that you are, as well as trying to achieve these goals, it's the maximum points that you're trying to achieve. So, let's talk about this rulebook before we get into the game itself. Now, it's a chunky Vital Lacerda game. That means it's a chunky Euro game. And therefore, there are many, many moving parts. So I made it a mission, just to find out how easy this game was to learn, to read the rulebook and to watch one video. And that was Paul Grogan's Gaming Rules video. And of course, Paul Grogan also helped with the rulebook. And I must admit that the first game I probably got around about 60% right. Then I went back to the rulebook, kind of brushed up on some of the bits that I might have missed over, and since then I've been playing it more or less right every single time. There's also a really handy reference guide as well that comes with it, and the reference guide just gives you an indication on what happens with all the various icons that are in the game, etc. But the meat and potatoes on how to learn the game, the rulebook, is nicely laid out. It's got some great diagrams in there. It explains mostly everything. There's only a bit of ambiguity when it comes to the solo game, and that's not necessarily to do with the rulebook. I think that's more to do with the solo mode, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. So once turn order has been established for you and Lacerda bot, the gameplay will take place over 2 distinct phases. The first of those phases is the colonisation phase, and these are your actions that you're going to take on the board, and this depends on whether you are orbit side or planet side. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, you start off in orbit side because you need to get resources that are being delivered from Earth. You then take those resources and your blueprints, etc., to the planet, and you will carry out actions there. But once you've done your colonisation moves on the orbit side, when you first start the game, you're going to catch the shuttle, and that's this little marker here, and that's going to take you over to the planet side. You and maybe Lacerda bot, and I'll explain why it's not always Lacerda bot in a wee while. You're going to go there, and then you're going to carry out your actions here. So you have the colonisation phase and the shuttle phase, and that will take you from the surface to the orbit, from orbit to surface, and allow you to do your moves. But you do not have to catch the shuttle every single turn. So ostensibly, the game is a resource management game, and one resource begats another. Now, there's this rather handy kind of Mars construction cycle here, which explains why you have to have one resource to then get more of another resource. So, building shelters for colonists to live in requires oxygen. Generating oxygen requires plants. Growing plants requires water. Extracting water requires power. Generating power requires minerals. And mining minerals requires colonists. And what that does is that tells you every type of resource that is in the game. We have minerals, we have water, we have plants, we have oxygen, and we have our very important colonists themselves. And these are key to actually performing almost every action in the game. So of course, you can buy resource if you're orbit side, so you can effectively get them from the warehouse here. You can buy tech tiles as well. These are technology tiles, and these help you upgrade things. So maybe the amount of shelters you can build so that you can then claim more resources, or the amount of water plants that you can build because you're limited in the early part of the game. So you can get resources from this side, you can get blueprints from this side, or you can increase your kind of colonisation on the planet itself and generate more resources by having more tiles on here and having advanced buildings which will generate their own resources. Now, there are a number of currencies in the game, but one of the major currencies for almost every single action is your worker meeples, and you start the game with 3 of these people. And what these will do is you will see on each of these spaces here that you use to generate an action, they will either be teal in colour or red at the top. Now, if they're teal in colour, to perform that action, you take one of your little worker meeples and you put him in the worker area here. That means for the rest of this turn, he's not available for any other use, so you're limited to a maximum of 3 goes. However, if you want to take one of these actions here that has a red worker meeple depicted on it, say for example you wanted a blueprint on this, you actually have to take your worker meeple and place him up there. And again, he's not available for any other go this turn. What that actually means though is that if I was then to want to do this action again, so if I wanted 2 blueprints, I could put my worker meeple on there, but I would also have to pay for any worker meeples that are in this box depicted by the red worker meeple. And that's the same on both sides apart from one space, which is the scientist side, and scientist space, and we'll come on to that in a bit. So your very valuable resources of these worker meeples get used up very, very quickly. And the only way to get them back is to travel back to this side of the planet. So on your first go, you don't really want to use all your meeples because you want to go onto Mars itself and then have some meeples to do actions on Mars. So when you get back into orbit, you can collect any meeples that have been used and put them back here for future use. And that's a really little clever circular system. However, as I say, resources and meeples are limited in the early stages. There are ways that you can get more of everything though. So you can see, there's a reason that you may not want to catch that shuttle each and every turn, because you may want to maximise some of the turns that you can take out here, or at least take more than one turn, and all the while the shuttle is turning round as well. Now, the Lacerda bot, if he gets the action to use any of these spaces, he doesn't pay any cost, he doesn't pay meeple cost, he just uses the spaces unless it's a red one, and he puts one of his meeples on there. So he doesn't pay anything. If there are 2 of his meeples on there, it doesn't matter to Lacerda bot, he will just continue to put meeples on there. All that will do is rack up the cost for you as and when you're going to go on a space where Lacerda bot has already put one of his meeples. So everything that you do on the orbit side of the board doesn't actually score you any points. What you're doing there is you're generating the ability to score points in a really thematic way. You're off planet, so there, it's the delivery station if you like, you have the ability to get those technology tiles which allow you to build more of everything or move your rovers around more. You have the ability to go to the warehouse and get some resources, and you have the ability to get some blueprints which then allow you to upgrade buildings on Planetside, which means that you will ultimately score more points. So thematically it works really, really well. You get those resources over there, then you come Planetside, and if you've left enough of your meeples, you can then carry out some Planetside actions, which is where the point scoring starts. So let's talk about the player boards before we talk about the Planetside actions, because these player boards are where you're going to record what resources you've got, how your technology has advanced, which gives you more building opportunities, also allows you to kind of release shelters. It's where you store your worker meeple, it's where some spaceships are, which bring more worker meeple over to the planet for you as well, and also it's where these little cubes are, which is how you track what buildings you built, and I'll come on to that in a little bit. Look, everything is on here, and this is kind of your heads-up display, if you like, from where you are. Initially, you're really limited in the amount of resources that you can carry. You can carry the same amount of resources as the number of shelters you have on the board plus 1, and you start with 1 shelter, which is this tile here. So everybody starts with a shelter. That means I can carry a maximum of 2 of any type of resource. That means that your options to actually perform many actions on the planet side are limited in the early stages, because each action that you perform, well, certainly if you're building a building, is going to require a resource of some sort. So, or if you want a scientist, and again, we'll talk about scientists in a bit. Also on here as well, though, there is ways to kind of increase that. So if I was to spend one of these oxygen resources here, and I put one of my worker meeples on the relevant place on the board, which would mean it putting it over there, I could then build another shelter. However, you're limited in building individual buildings or complex buildings. So a complex is classed as any 2 or more buildings that are adjacent to each other. And as you can see here, my shelter tech tile is plus 2. That's where everybody starts. That means I can actually build a complex of 3 shelters next to each other, which is fine. That means I can actually get quite a few there. But if you look at everything else, all my other resources are blank. That means I cannot build a complex of, say, a power facility, because there's one already on the board. I can't do a +1. I would actually have to buy that technology tile from Orbitside, put it onto my board, claim a resource, and that means I can build 1+1. There are then actions on the Orbitside which allow you to then progressively increase the amount of various buildings that you can put on the board. And that's a rather clever system. It helps you grow, it helps you manage your resources, and it goes back to this entire thing that one resource does begat another, and therefore kind of maximizing what you can do with each individual resource in spending, in recording it on your player board, in making sure you've got enough shelters on your player board to increase your number of resources, which allow you, when you go back onto orbit, to then buy the relevant technology tile, which allows you to then upgrade it and increase the number of complexes that you've got on there on the buildings. You can then upgrade them, and that means that you can then start scoring points from them. Now, the other thing on here is these spaceships. As I said at the beginning, you're limited to 3 worker meeples. There is an action when you when you are planetside that if you spend 1 plant and 1 water resource, you can bring another one of these spaceships over to you into your hangar, and for that you can actually get either another 2 meeples or a meeple and a robot. However, initially you can only store a maximum of 4 meeples in here, so what you're probably going to have to do fairly early on is build a shelter complex which creates 2 more spaces, so you could theoretically bring even more meeples across. And again, there's a scoring mechanism here, so for every shelter that you build, as long as it's occupied at the end of the game, you could score a maximum of 21 points. And that's this real kind of juggling juxtaposition that's going on the player board. It's as important as the main board itself, and there are other things on here like crystals and paying for executive actions, etc. Again, watch the Paul Grogan video, that'll give you more detail. For the solo game, you lay out everything on the AI board that said they don't use any resources whatsoever. We just assume that they've got resources. Their planes or their spaceships will come along whenever a colony is upgraded, and we'll talk about colony upgrading soon, which will automatically means they will build another shelter, and then that will give them the scoring points there, and we always assume that these are full. And the important thing about the AI, about Lacerda bot, is we always assume he's got enough meeples for everything, so he doesn't actually pay for anything, he just does. And therefore there's the differences in the player board, which is a real centre of operation, and the Lacerda board, which really is just kind of marking how many crystals he's got, what planes, what spaceships he's got, where his tech tiles are, and he scores for moving up the board, as we all do. At the end of the game, as you can see, for every 6 tile that you got, and there's only 1 space for that, you get 9 opportunity points at the end of the game, and he can progress up this track with various tech tiles very, very, very quickly. So that's kind of the orbit side and the player board done. The real kind of scoring opportunities come on this side of the board. If I've got one tip, it's build fast and build early, because when you build, that's when you start scoring your opportunity points. Now, I've mentioned the fact that you're limited in the amount of complexes that you can build based on how many technology tiles you've got, but say you were the first person in the game, rather than Lacerda bot, to build another oxygen place or another water purification plant. What you can't do at the moment is you can't join it to another water purification plant, because you don't have the relevant tech tile to do that. However, what you can do is build it exactly 2 spaces away, and you've got a little robot here, and this robot dictates your building area. So if my robot was there, what I could do is I could build that water purification plant there, pay the relevant cost to build it. That allows me to move up on this tracker, and the very first time one of you, either you or Lacerda bot, builds on that tracker, you get 2 opportunity points. I would then also score on these randomized tiles at the top, and you choose 4 out of 8, I think it is, and that would then afford me another 2 opportunity points for every of these discovery tiles I've got, which I wouldn't have at the moment. Then there's also another scoring point, another resource point here, where I can move my robot again, or I could lift up a worker and put him back, or I could get a crystal or a mineral. And this LSS system, the life support system, as you build on there, this is your key way of scoring. Of course, to do it, I have to pay a meeple, and that meeple would have to go on that space there, and I wouldn't get him back until I came back round the board. And if there was already a Lacerda bot meeple on there, then I have to pay the cost of that as well. And that's the clever thing about the Lacerda bot in this respect. As it builds, it starts to fill these spaces, and you may not have enough crystals or not have enough resources to actually pay to put a building in place. But it's not just building that you can do on this side of the board, because on the planet side of the board is where you're going to use everything you gain from orbit side and use every one of your resources to try and maximize your scoring opportunities. Now, I've already mentioned that when you build a building for the first time, or the Lacerda bot builds a building for the first time, you will claim 2 opportunity points, and whatever tile gives you an opportunity point at the top. This one is another 2 opportunity points for every spaceship you've got in your hangar. In the early stages, that won't score you, but as you build there progressively, that will score you, because you may well have spaceships in your hangar. And as the LSS kind of levels up to the level of what this LSS marker is, it will then move up. And that then dictates, first of all, this here. Now, if you remember the mission, if you remember the shuttle, it started on space 1 up at the top of the board. This now means it starts on space 2. So every 2 turns, that means that the mission, the shuttle, will go from orbit to planet side, and that starts to give you more actions on either orbit side or planet side, and it helps you plan a little bit more. And again, it can go up again, and every 3 turns, etc. there, so you get even more on each side. There's also this marker here, and what that means is, say, I don't know, Lacerda bot was the first one to build this battery, because that's where his robot is. So we put his battery marker on there, and then he also built, I don't know, an agriculture plant in there. As this moves up and it unveils this, that little marker on the first and second time it upgrades gives you additional scoring, which is down here. So if he got 2 markers on there, then he would get 2 victory points or 2 opportunity points. If he got 3 markers on there, he would get 4. If he'd got all 5 markers on there, he would get 11 victory points, and that is for the first 2 times you upgrade, and also end of game scoring as well. So it really does pay to try and build every type of or upgrade every type of building. That way you can ensure that you will then score opportunity points. But I'll come back to another action on here as well in a wee while. As we look up to the top here, this action here, now this is the only action on the board, I think, where you don't have to use a worker meeple. You can move your rover, which effectively goes around and sweeps up these kind of discovery tiles, etc., and crystals on the board, 2 spaces, and you can then also move your robot 2 spaces, and by moving the robot, that then gives you a different building area to build your buildings on. We have here, which allows you would place a meeple in one of these, your appropriately coloured meeple in there, and that would then allow you to claim a scientist, which when you've upgraded buildings, you then get additional scoring points. And then if we look a little bit above that as well, we've got here, you've always seen the build space at the top there, so you need to put a meeple on there to build. And if you've got the relevant blueprint that you've collected from orbit side, you'd put a meeple there to then upgrade. So this really is the major scoring point. But there are timers in the game, or one significant timer in the game, and let's talk about those, because this symbol here is very important for those timers. So all that's very well and good. You can actually just carry on building up your resources, expanding your colony, and try and maximise your opportunity points and beat Lacerda bot with the other objectives. However, there are timers in the game, and these come in the form of these individual mission cards. Now, there are a number of these that you choose. There are cards for a long game and cards for a short game, and you can mix and match. And what you do is you place these on these A, B and C mission spots, and every time you contribute to each of these missions, so this one would be taking a contract card, you move the little red marker 1 down. Then, when one of those reaches the check mark, you move this timer cube to the next one on. Once you've completed 3 of those, you then play a final round, and then you do your scoring. So in a multiplayer game, obviously everybody's contributing to different objectives all the time and progressing the timer that way. In the solo game, what happens is your Lacerda bot card has these symbols on there, which, as you can see at the top, it says A and a little arrow. That means when you pull this card out, you will move the objective down 1. And what that does is that progresses the timer in the game for the solo game, which potentially can cause its own issues. Before we totally get onto the Lacerda bot and his cards, just go back to the game, and that is essentially most of the moves in the game. There are different things. You get these exploration tiles and discovery tiles. There's ways that you kind of upgrade your building. There's a use of scientists which score you additional points on there. There's how you put your buildings on the board. There's moving your rover around there to collect crystals, etc. on the board. There's lots of things, and as I say, this is more of an overview on how the game plays. But of course, we hear about the solo game, and the key driver in the solo game is this deck of Lacerda bot cards. And these are easily identifiable, of course, by the fact it's got a little picture of a Lacerda on the back of there. Now, the important thing to remember when you're playing the solo game is that you're not necessarily playing against Lacerda. He's not a competitive opponent. Yes, he's going to, you have your objectives that you need to try and beat. Getting the most opportunity points, or getting the most contracts out, or having a level 6 tech tile. Those are all objectives, but he's not actively working against you. As a solo player, what this is more of an annoyance than anything. And I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. As I mentioned, you're not necessarily playing against the Lacerda bot. He's going to go off and do his own thing, and with this AI deck that you've got, it's a relatively rudimentary AI deck. There is no real intelligence behind it. You have a number of cards that you're going to pull out at any one time, flip over for Lacerda's turn, and they're going to dictate the actions that you take. There's no intelligence in terms of placing anything, in terms of decision trees against where you are on the board, or your objectives, or where you may want to take things. There's nothing of that sort. You're just literally going to play the instruction that's on the card, and that makes it a little bit of a a little bit of a less interactive experience than I would anticipate from a meaty game like this with a solo mode. Don't get me wrong, it's nothing less than enjoyable, but whilst you're playing it, you tend to feel like you're practicing and honing your skills, so that when you play a multiplayer version of On Mars, that's where your skills will come out and it will really start to shine. And I think that comes out of kind of, as I say, the actions that are on the cards. So let's just take a look at these cards in a little bit more depth, and I'll explain exactly what they do. So there are 12 AI cards in total, and they're split up into kind of 3 groups, with A at the top being for Objective A or Mission A, B being Mission B, and C being Mission C. And for your first run through the cards, most of these icons in red really don't count, because they only come into play once you've actually gone through the deck of cards once. So once you've gone through your first 12 AI actions, then what will happen is you will then shuffle the cards and start pulling them out again, and then whenever you pull a card out that has a symbol on it with an arrow pointing left, that means that you will move the relevant mission marker to the left. And of course, that's your timer going down there. The more of those missions that you complete, the quicker that your timer goes through the game, and the quicker the game ends. The only constant red icon that starts from the very first time is this little X here. And what that means is that if Lacerda, if the shuttle is about to go, so you're moving from orbit side to planet side, or planet side to orbit, and the last card you pulled out has a little X on it, that means that Lacerda stays where they are. They do not catch the shuttle. They stay where they are and complete another action either in orbit or on the planet. Of course, if that little X isn't there, what that means is they will, of course, then catch the shuttle and move that way. And where these X's are obviously just kind of 3 cards in total, so 1 on each, and that means that the mission cube doesn't go to the left there. So that's pretty good. Obviously, that means that what they're doing there is they're not, the timer isn't run down on there. But as you can see, that still leaves 9 cards, and 9 cards where the mission timer is going to go down after you play through it on the first go round. So then you've got a number of numbers here, 1, 2 and 3, and they dictate the actions that Lacerda bot will take on either the orbit side or the planet side of the board. So orbit side, if it's a 1, that means that Lacerda bot will obtain a blueprint. If it's a 2, they will learn new tech, so they will take a tech tile. And if it's a 3, it's research and development, so they will then increase the power on that tech tile and obviously gain the benefits of that and then get the additional scoring. If it's on the colony side, so you're on the planet side, should I say, then number 1 is that they construct a building. which is a little bit ambiguous, and again we'll talk about that in a second. Or they upgrade a building, so they use a blueprint card to upgrade a building, or they take a scientist as well. So you can see there's a constant slew of actions, but there is no real intelligence here in this AI. It is off doing its own thing. And I think one of my biggest concerns about the game is this ability to move down the missions rather quickly. It actually makes the game over too quickly, and that's a complaint I have about the solo game. Literally just getting into the swing of it and it's game over because Lacerda bot has moved all the missions down. So let's talk about some of the ambiguities that are created here. So with any AI system that you're playing in a solo game, there will always be a level of ambiguity. It's not totally mapped out. And unfortunately in Unmars what happens is it kind of leaves those ambiguities. So say for example, Lacerda gets to build a building and his time to build a building is a power operation here, and he wants to build one in this area. And you have potentially, say he can build a complex 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that he can build. Rather than actually giving you a decision tree as to where he should build that, if it's within 2 spaces of such and so, if it has, I don't know, a crystal on it or something like that, which it would kind of remove from the board, all it asks you to do is assign each of those hexes a number, and then reveal a card, and whatever number is on there, that starts honing it down for you. So here I go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I draw a card, and that's number 1, and that means it's either going to be that space or that space. Then I could do 1 and 2, and I draw another card, and it says it's 1. So I'm going to place that building there. There's no real interaction with the game, and I think that ambiguity there is just it's counterproductive. It's kind of a little bit kind of demonstrates a slightly undercooked AI system, which is a real shame because of the ambiguities that are in this game, in the AI system, because of the fairly rudimentary AI system that's in place, and because of the fact that, you know, once you've gone through the deck the first time, your missions are going to be kind of accelerating and going down at almost an exponential rate. It kind of destroys a little bit of the feel in the solo game. I really enjoy the puzzle, and I love playing this game, and I'm having a great time playing this game solo. I can truly see that this is a game that will absolutely shine with multiplayer interaction. So I'm going to be taking this to my local gaming group in the next week or so, hopefully get a multiplayer gaming of it, because for me that AI system, the fact that you start racing through these objectives, I know I've mentioned it, it makes the game over too quickly. If I'm spending 10 or 15 minutes setting a game out and 10 or 15 minutes kind of putting it away at the end of it, I want a good, meaty, chunky game. And unfortunately for the solo experience, whilst it's good, it doesn't quite deliver that experience for me. You can get through a game of this in about an hour, and that is a major criticism of the AI system. It allows you to learn the mechanics of the game. But, just when you're getting into the swing of things, it's game over, and that's a slight annoyance. Okay, so final thoughts on the solo experience of On Mars by Eagle Gryphon Games. Look, I do genuinely like the game. You set it out, and first of all, obviously, it looks fantastic. You've got that game tray system in there, and relatively easy to set up, and it looks great on the table, this big sprawling presence on the table. The mechanics are absolutely fantastic, and for a Euro game, you've got a theme that actually links into what you're playing there as well, which is, it misses out on a lot of Euro games. This feels like you are playing a kind of planetary exploration and colonization game deep in that theme, and I think that's really good. The split between orbit side and planet side is fantastic. The fact that the shuttle goes around and then increases your kind of amounts of turns that you can take on either the planet side or orbit side are all absolutely brilliant. The sacrifices that you have to make between, I don't know, gaining a resource or gaining a blueprint, or maybe expanding your complexes, or exploring so you can build in a different place, or or collecting crystals or bringing people in on spaceships. It's all brilliant. You get these real kind of dichotomies going on. I want to do this, but I know I need to do that, and it creates for a really thinky game. So I think this game will absolutely shine in multiplayer, and I'm going to say, mentioned earlier, I'm going to take it to my local gaming group in the very near future. Hopefully get a couple of multiplayer games in there. I think that'll deepen my love for it as well. Now, the solo game is where it becomes a little bit of an issue, in the fact that, as I have mentioned, I don't think that solo deck feels integrated enough. There's no intelligence, there is no decision trees there. You're literally just drawing cards, performing the actions on the cards, resolving ambiguities in what is itself a really ambiguous way, and then doing your own turns and then drawing another card. And all the time you've got this timer ticking down at a really too fast rate, and it almost destroys the kind of the strategy that you're building in the game, the fact that a game can be over too soon. I do feel that the solo mode, whilst it's good and I get a lot of enjoyment out of it, and I'm so glad and privileged I got the opportunity to actually play the solo mode, and I will be playing it a lot more as well, for a game that's going to retail around about $100, as a purely solo experience, it's very difficult for me to totally recommend this game. I am very much looking forward to Eagle Gryphon's and Vital Lacerda's next game, which is Kanban EV, which has just launched on Kickstarter. They're actually working with David Turczi on a solo mode for Kanban EV, and we all know how David Turczi works, things like Tricerion, which is just one of the best solo modes I've played. It's got a real intelligence and drive and kind of streamlines for your points there. That will be great in Kanban EV. What I'd really like to see is a David Turczi type mode for On Mars. I am truly looking forward to some of the fan-made solo variants that will inevitably come out of the community in the months and years to come for On Mars, because I think that solo experience can absolutely be bettered. So yeah, I love the game. I think the game is fantastic. I think from a solo perspective, I enjoy playing it, and it's training me for when I'm going to play a multiplayer game. But I can't wholeheartedly, given the price tag, and given the lack of integration of that AI, that solo AI, I cannot wholeheartedly recommend it for purely solo experience. If you like Vital Lacerda's games and a solo player, then it may well be that this is exactly your kind of game. So, I'm not going to tell you guys to not buy this or go out and buy this. What I'm saying is it will have a market in its current existing form for solo players. If the solo mode gets some form of expansion or further integration from maybe David Turczi, who knows? Put it in as a stretch goal for the Kanban EV, that we can get a David Turczi on Mars mode, then suddenly you'll see this game come alive in the solo community. But for me, I really like it. It's a great game, great production values, looks fantastic on the table. I just needed that solo to be a bit more Tricerion and less just drawing cards from a deck. So there we go, Noteboard Gamers. Thank you once again for joining me on my journey through On Mars, the solo experience. As I mentioned in the final thoughts, I like it. I don't think it's a fantastic solo system, but it'd be great to actually see what happens in the future with this. So once again, thank you very much for joining me in this video. And do remember that you can always like and subscribe to Not Bored Gaming. You can follow us on Instagram or on Facebook, and that's always BORED. You can always obviously subscribe to the channel. You can check out our other videos. And in the meantime, remember, if you've got nobody else to play with, there's nothing wrong with playing with yourselves.